The Ukrainian army was fighting against 3 different military forces in most of the front lines, in addition to the regular Russian army. The mercenaries of the Wagner Group fighting the Ukrainians and pro-Russian Chechen fighters were reinforcements in the game set up by the Kremlin. However, as a result of Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin's rebellion against Russian leader Vladimir Putin, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, and Russian Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov, Wagner forces began to withdraw, especially from the Donbas region. As a result of the actions of Wagner forces in Russian cities such as Moscow and Rostov, Russia announced that it would not use this mercenary group in Ukraine again and sent Prigozhin to Belarus. At this very moment, the soldiers of Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, who fought for Russia in Ukraine, took the opportunity to withdraw the mercenaries of the Wagner Group from the front lines. After the end of the Prigozhin uprising, Kadyrov continued to intensively send his fighters to the territory of Ukraine. Russia especially wanted to fill the gaps of Wagner troops on the eastern front lines of Ukraine with Kadyrov's soldiers. Chechen troops deployed to almost every front line of the Donetsk region, especially Bakhmut, took action to slow down or even stop the offensive operations of the Ukrainian armed forces in the critical region of Zaporizhia, Donetsk. The assault brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces had turned their last route to the city of Makiivka in the Donetsk region. Heavy clashes took place here, and the Russian regular army and Kadyrov's soldiers suffered stunning losses. In addition, the Ukrainian army reported that as a result of this striking offensive operation, a Russian military depot was destroyed in Makiivka, under the control of Moscow in the Donetsk region. Officials commissioned by Russia, on the other hand, announced that a platoon of Russian troops was wounded in the attack. The Office of Strategic Communications of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that as a result of precision fire by the defense forces in the temporarily occupied Makiivka, not only the Russians, but also the Chechen troops suffered serious losses. An accompanying video on the Telegram messaging app showed a massive explosion occurring in a sparsely populated area in Makiivka. The location of the drone and phone images from the building and terrain that matched the satellite and file images of the area was verified. The place where the attack took place was also the command center of the Akhmet Battalion, one of the most elite squads of Chechen troops. Akhmet Battalion was the Chechens' elite unit that Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov trusted most, and Russian leader Vladimir Putin gave the most comfort in Ukraine. But Ukrainian attacks and artillery fire in Makiivka also destroyed the building where the Akhmet Battalion was stationed. As a result of these incredible attacks, Yevgeny Pisarenko, one of the commanders of Kadyrov's Special Forces Detachment Akhmet Battalion, was liquidated. Thus, Kadyrov lost his second general yesterday after his brother-in-law, Adam Delimkhanov, last week. This stunning news was announced by the commander of the Akhmet unit. Apti allowed enough. Yevgeny Pisarenko supported Putin's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and went to war voluntarily to supposedly protect the people of the Donbas. Pisarenko is a native of the Stavropol territory. He served in Stavropol, Oman, for many years, where he rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Makiivka was his last post. This striking loss greatly angered Kadyrov. In addition, the liquidation of Pisarenko caused serious shocks in Moscow because after Putin could not get the performance he expected from Wagner forces, the dissolution of Chechen troops fighting for Russia on Ukrainian soil indicated that alarm bells were ringing for Moscow. It's claimed that the top commanders of Russia are among the names who think that the Chechen troops will be defeated on the territory of Ukraine and that the Wagner troops will be much more effective in supporting the Russian army. International intelligence sources claim that Sergei Surovikin again wants to revive the Wagner forces on Ukrainian soil. The fate of Sergei Surovikin, a top Russian general suspected of ties to Prigozhin and deputy commander of Russian troops in Ukraine, is still unknown. He reported that Surovikin was still in isolation as an influential figure in the Russian government, put pressure on him and refused to allow the general's release. Recent reports on the subject indicate that the person reporting this news is Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. After Shoigu's statements, Surovikin's inner circle still remained untouched, and the Russian general's family was informed that Surovikin would not be arrested. Western publications claimed that Surovikin knew in advance that Prigozhin was going to challenge the Russian High Military Command and was planning a military revolt. In fact, When we look at the critical details about the final distribution of Wagner elements in the eastern front lines of Ukraine, we encounter traces that this claim may be true. Various PMCs created by Gazprom were detected in the Bakhmut region. PMCs such as Podok and Fakkel are allegedly still stationed and hidden in Bakhmut. Western sources publishing these claims argue that Surovikin was even aware of the Wagner deployment in Bakhmut. Such a fiasco destroys the confidence of Russian citizens, both in Moscow and the Russian Ministry of Defense. With all this in mind, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu may be keeping Russian General Sergei Surovikin in isolation because he knows too much to keep secret. Many military experts and war analysts think that Sergei Surovikin may be declared a traitor in Russia after a certain period of time. But the Moscow administration and Shoigu claims that Surovikin is a traitor in order to exonerate them may do more harm than good to Russia because the deficiencies in the command level due to the heavy losses in the Russian army are destroying the faith of the Russian citizens in this war. In other words, Russia is losing not only the Chechen commanders that it uses as reinforcements on the territory of Ukraine, but also the high-level military officials in the command of its own army. One by one, alongside the purge of Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Pisarenko, commander of the Chechen elite Akhmet Battalion in Makiivka, Russia, lost an important high-ranking commander near Bakhmut. Russian Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Agafonov, codenamed Paris, deputy commander of the 11th Brigade of the Russian Army, was liquidated near Bakhmut. Ukrainian blogger Necromancer confirmed that this senior Russian military official was dead. Agafonov was a political instructor for the Russian military, meaning he was in charge of propaganda and was frequently seen in vulgar videos. There is little information about the death of the RF Armed Forces, Lieutenant Colonel. All that is known is the detail that Agafonov died in the direction of Bakhmut, where Ukrainian troops actively counterattacked and broke through the Russian defenses on the flanks. After the liquidation of Yevgeny Pisarenko, one of the commanders of the Chechen Akhmet elite unit in Makiivka, the loss of Russian Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Agafonov, codenamed Paris, deputy commander of the 11th Brigade of Russia, dealt a heavy blow to Moscow. Adding to the stunning success of deaths was the liquidation of 4 officers of the RF Armed Forces near the port in Mariupol. District officials stated that 4 Russian officers were blown up in a special area in the Primorsky district of the city not far from the port. Local residents have publicly reported that after the explosion in Mariupol, ambulances and firefighters began to circulate around the city. Judging by the footage taken from the blast site, the building in the area where the Russian officers were located was blown up, and then the wreckage of the house was destroyed by a massive fire. The Mariupol opposition partisan movement allegedly claimed responsibility for the attack. The murder of 4 Russian officers in the attack operation organized by the Mariupol opposition partisan movement in the city strained the nerves in Moscow. We see that the war between Ukraine and Russia is a mini-world war that has an impact on Europe, the Black Sea, the Baltics and the Arctic, the Mediterranean, and even the Middle East and Africa. The economic and military effects of the war are absolutely global. Our first wish is to have peace so that these effects do not grow. But this seems distant in current diplomatic and political relations. For this reason, the success of the Ukrainian armed forces on the front is of great importance for Ukraine and Europe, and it can be viewed as a matter of life and death. Since the war between Ukraine and Russia began, we have observed how the Ukrainian armed forces cope with the harsh conditions. The superiority of the Russian Navy, especially in the Black Sea, could cause great troubles for Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian armed forces launched dozens of attacks on the Russian Navy stationed in the Black Sea after the sinking of the Russian Navy's flagship cruiser, Moskva, in April. Russia gradually lost power in the Black Sea. Crimea have cornered the Russians in the Black Sea. This causes the Russians to be nervous about every move in the Black Sea, losing its influence in the Baltic Sea. Russia seems to lose its influence on the Black Sea as well after losing Snake Island to the Ukrainians. We know that the activities of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea were not going well. But after the success of Ukrainian attacks in the port of Sevastopol in Crimea, the Black Sea turned into hell for the Russian Navy. The information disclosed in the published report shows us that the Russian Navy would turn into a vicious cycle. NATO aircraft began to follow Russian ships in the Black Sea. NATO aviation launched a new pressure against Russia by tracking Russian ships in the Black Sea. At the moment, at least 2 military aircraft are watching Russian ships, the Crimea and the left bank of the Kherson region. This may indicate that a new offensive is being prepared by the armed forces of Ukraine, as such actions coincided with earlier when the Russian Navy tried to approach the Ukrainian coast before it was thwarted by Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles and American Harpoon anti-ship missiles. In addition, the Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 sent the approaching Russian warships or boats to the bottom of the sea. Currently, the U.S. military aircraft Bombardier Challenger 600 Artemis is actively flying over the eastern part of Romania and part of the Black Sea, which can be used to conduct electronic intelligence and repel attacks over the central part of the Black Sea. The U.S. strategic drone, RQ-4 Global Hawk, is actively flying. US drones are also moving along an unusual trajectory reconnaissance on the left bank of the Kherson region. In addition, the entire western Black Sea region is monitored by Turkish UAVs. Previously, it was alleged that such flights coincided with the attacks of the armed forces of Ukraine, which did not exclude the recurrence of a similar situation. The intensification of NATO air flights shows that the North Atlantic Alliance did not heed Russia's warnings. Moreover, since some drones and planes fly with the transponders turned off, there may be a lot more flights for reconnaissance at this point. Let's examine the Russian Navy movements in the Black Sea. When we look at the reports, we witness an increase in Russian warship activities in the Black Sea. Defense analysts are watching the Russian Navy carefully, especially in the context of Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to Washington. A sudden change in activity levels or patterns may indicate upcoming operations. Ukraine has pushed the Russian Navy into a largely passive position in the Black Sea in recent months. This contrasted sharply with the onset of the war when they dominated the area. But in the last few days there has been a significant change in the model. In recent weeks, the Black Sea near Sebastopol has been filled with submarines and warships. Open sources, including analysis of Sentinel-2 satellite images from the European Space Agency, indicate increased activity. Sentinel-2 satellite showed us that there are many ships outside the port in local time. Among them was a Kilo-class submarine that appeared to be returning to base. 4 of Russia's enhanced Kilo-class submarines are currently in the Black Sea. They are used to launch Kalibr cruise missiles into Ukraine. It appears that they now operate from Sebastopol when they are active for missile strikes, possibly to simplify reloading. The submarine is accompanied by a fast boat, possibly a Raptor attack boat, and a helicopter, possibly an Mi-8 HIP. These are here to protect against Ukrainian unscrewed surface ships, also known as naval drones. Ukraine had previously attacked ships with these on the 29th of October, while none of them sank. The Russian Navy takes the threat very seriously. This level of activity has not been seen for weeks. Ships and submarines still come and go, but the frequency has increased. There are rumors that this activity gives us a message for an upcoming military operation. It is unclear why the Russian Navy suddenly increased activity. It is probably political and a reaction to the narrative that they are being pulled to the safety of their base. Presumably, this is a sign of Russia's military response to President Zelensky's visit to Washington. It is possible that we may see more Kalibr cruise missile strikes, but there are a few scenarios where this can happen. Moldova recently warned that it sees an increasing threat of amphibious landings and tried to build a land bridge to Transnistria. Alternatively, Russia may be waiting for the Ukraine to move south from Kherson to the Crimea, one of the ships observed. Sailing north appears to be a repair ship. These aids can be important to support combat operations. Thus, someone leaving Sevastopol moving towards the relative protection of a river in northern Crimea could be a leading indicator of larger operations. On the other hand, according to Russian media, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that the Admiral Gorshkov frigate will be armed with Zircon hypersonic missiles and will go on combat patrol in January 2023. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that the delivery of these missiles to the Russian Navy has already begun. Shoigu said that the frigate would be armed with these weapons before embarking on a mission in the Atlantic Ocean. Putin said Zircon hypersonic missiles can travel up to 9 times the speed of sound and have a hit range of more than 620 miles. One of these was tested on May 28 this year when it was fired from a warship in the Barents Sea and hit a hub target 600 miles away in the White Sea. Russia used hypersonic missiles at least once during its conflict with Ukraine and in mid-March struck the port city of Odessa with Kinzhal missiles. So what are hypersonic weapons and why are they important to modern warfare? Hypersonic missiles can travel at 25 times the speed of sound over 30,000 miles per hour. Hypersonic weapons include hypersonic cruise missiles and hypersonic glide vehicles. The former is limited to altitudes below 100 ft, whereas hypersonic glides can travel higher in the atmosphere. Hypersonic weapons move slower than ballistic weapons, but their atmospheric travel allows them to be maneuvered more easily and therefore more difficult to detect by anti-missile systems. It's very difficult to hit them not only because of their high speed, but also because they are flying in a region of the atmosphere we didn't need to defend before, says Ian Boyd, director of the U.S. Center for National Security Initiatives. They fly higher than airplanes and regular missiles but fly lower than satellites and ballistic missiles. Also, modern hypersonic weapons maneuvering makes tracking them much more difficult than ballistic missiles. The continuation of these war activities of Russian warships is a very important issue for them because after the loss of dominance in the Black Sea, they weakened in many regions. Putin wants to close this gap and return his navy to its former strength. However, as we mentioned at the beginning, Ukraine and allied forces imprisoned the Russian Black Sea Fleet in the Black Sea, and it's unlikely that the Russian Navy will return to its old days. The Russian forces are hemmed in by a wide territory that stretches from the battle lines in the south of Ukraine all the way to the Crimea. It would appear that these intense attacks will continue indefinitely until the Ukrainians achieve their primary objective, which is the liberation of the Crimean Peninsula. The Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to construct a lengthy offensive corridor that will connect roads located on the southern front lines in preparation for the liberation of Crimea. In order to accomplish this goal, the Ukrainian army have most recently engaged in combat, principally on the front line in Zaporizhia. The Russian forces in the Zaporizhia region were defeated as a result of the great assault plans devised by Kiev in this area. The Russians were finally driven out of the last 9 communities. Despite this, the Ukrainian army is still carrying out their aggressive attacks in this region. The objective of the Ukrainian armed forces was to advance and liberate Zaporizhia, as well as the shoreline front lines in order to make progress toward this objective. Kiev's next stop was the port city of Berdyansk, which is under Russian control. The port city of Berdyansk is particularly vital to both of the warring parties currently engaged in the conflict. The Sea of Azov can be reached via the city's coastline. The Russians want to bring the navy into the conflict and build a strategic front against Kiev by seizing this opportunity. But there is one point that Moscow neglected to consider. The major offensive plans carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces are supported by cutting-edge contemporary weapons, missile defense systems, and armored fighting vehicles that have been supplied by the West and the United States of America. These Western vehicles are being driven into the field by the Ukrainian army, both on the front line in Zaporizhia and in the city of Berdyansk, where they are fighting. It was in Zaporizhia when Western military vehicles helped the Ukrainian army establish a huge area of domination. Now it is time to do the same thing in Berdyansk, which is one of the Russian army's strongholds. Battle tanks such as the German Leopard 2 and the British Challenger are included in this group of vehicles. These 2 massive battle tanks are also known as war beasts, and they are now making their way toward the front lines of Berdyansk, which are located in Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces, with the assistance of these Western tanks, have recently been successful in penetrating the Russian defenses along the Berdyansk front line by a distance of 2 kilometers in Berdyansk, Melitopol, and on the left bank of the Dnipro River. The Russians have established their Third Army as a result of their first mobilization. Additionally, they have units from their senior 22nd Army and their 1st Elite Guard Army. Approximately 14 months were spent by the Russian army in establishing a highly serious defense line in these locations. The Russian military established new logistical lines as well as bases and airports. However, it is clear that none of them were able to defend themselves against the assault launched by Ukraine. Here, the Russian army's first line of defense was breached about a month ago, and now the Ukrainian forces are making their way through the Russian army's second line of protection in the city of Berdyansk. Extraordinary functions in terms of both armor and maneuverability are being provided by the Leopard 2 and Challenger tanks that are constructing a safe corridor for Ukrainian infantry units. The artillery fire of these Western tanks has been successful, allowing the Ukrainian forces to easily reach the Russian lines in Berdyansk. Additionally, the Ukrainian troops moving from the land can observe that the Russian soldiers heading in this direction have already been neutralized. To put it another way, Ukrainian troops that are advancing from the ground line are engaging in additional reconnaissance and detection operations in Berdyansk. The majority of the work is done by British Challenger and German Leopard combat tanks, respectively. The city of Berdyansk was one of the most trusted front lines for the Russians. Yet the Russian defense in Berdyansk was ineffective. The fortifications in this city, which Putin commanded, came dangerously close to collapsing, thanks to the Western tanks employed by the Ukrainians. According to Valery Churkin, a spokesman for the Joint Press Office of Dietry Direction Defense Forces, the advance of the Ukrainian army in the south is becoming increasingly bloody with each passing day. This information was provided by the Direction Defense Forces. In addition, spokesman Churkin made the announcement that the Ukrainian armed forces had systematically applied pressure to some sections of the front, broke in through the fortifications of the Russian army in the southern trenches and destroyed its positions. The presence of Western tanks in the arsenal of the Ukrainian army on the front lines in places like Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Zaporizhia was a significant reason for the attack plans developed by Kiev. Because Ukraine has westernized and updated its inventory while the Russian army has lost around 4,000 battle tanks, the Russian army does not appear to have much of a chance in this regard. So how exactly did the Ukrainian military manage to make such significant headway in Berdyansk, which is considered to be one of President Putin's most trusted front line? The contribution of Western tanks to the advancements made in Ukraine is without a doubt fairly significant. However, the Russian troops located in and near Berdyansk did not appear to respond in any way to the advancements made by the Ukrainians. The rationale behind this has been the subject of great discussion. However, the main reason why the Russians were impotent in this regard was because the Ukrainian army launched missile attacks in this city over the past few days. These attacks were carried out by the Ukrainian army. If you recall, the Ukrainians carried out an attack on the Russian military installation in Berdyansk with 11 Storm Shadow long-range missiles. The military administration of the city of Berdyansk reported 11 explosions in the city, as well as the sound of an explosion and the sight of fire in the surrounding area. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces have made it official and verified that they hit the airspace in the city of Berdyansk, which is currently under temporary occupation. The Russians suffered devastating losses as a direct consequence of these mind-boggling attacks, including the destruction of their primary headquarters in Berdyansk, as well as their fuel and mineral oil stockpiles. Satellites positioned above the Berdyansk airport captured images of Russian attack helicopters and drones in the area. Satellites operated by Planet Labs were able to identify specific Kar-52, Mi-8, or Mi-24 attack aircraft as well as 13 Kar-29 ship transports. The Russian military had a total of 27 helicopters stationed at the airfield where they were based. It was stated that these aircraft were destroyed as a result of the Storm Shadow missile attacks carried out by the Ukrainian army.